For generations, historians and archaeologists believed that the story of human civilization followed a clear and logical path. According to everything we thought we knew, early humans first learned how to grow crops and domesticate animals. Agriculture allowed people to settle in one place instead of constantly wandering in search of food. These settlements slowly grew into villages. Over time, those villages expanded into larger communities and eventually into the first cities. Only after cities appeared, historians believed, did complex religions develop. Temples were built. Priests emerged. Monumental structures were constructed to honor gods and organize religious life. This timeline seemed simple, reasonable, and supported by centuries of archaeological evidence. But what if that timeline is wrong? What if the very first monumental temples were not the result of civilization, but the cause of it? What if religion came before cities and not after them? And what if the evidence for that possibility has been hiding in plain sight for thousands of years? In the remote hills of southeastern Turkey, not far from the modern city of Kenliurfa, there stands an archaeological site that has forced scientists to rethink everything they thought they knew about the origins of human civilization. The place is called Göbekli Tepe, and according to modern archaeology, it may be the oldest temple complex ever built by human hands. At first glance, Göbekli Tepe does not look extraordinary. It appears as nothing more than a quiet hill rising above the surrounding plains. For thousands of years, travelers passed by without realizing that beneath this hill lay one of the most important discoveries in human history. But hidden under layers of soil and stone was something astonishing. A vast complex of massive stone temples. Structures that were built nearly 12,000 years ago? To understand just how shocking that number is, we have to compare it to other famous monuments in human history. The Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt, one of the most iconic structures ever built, was constructed around 2500 BC. Stonehenge in England, another famous prehistoric monument, dates back to roughly 3000 BC. Göbekli Tepe, however, was built around 9600 BC. That means it is more than 7,000 years older than the pyramids of Egypt. It is older than Stonehenge, older than the earliest cities of Mesopotamia. In fact, Göbekli Tepe was built during a time when human beings were believed to live only as small groups of hunter-gatherers. These early people were thought to have lived simple lives. They moved frequently across the landscape, following migrating animals and seasonal plants. They had no permanent homes, no cities, and no written language. Their tools were made primarily of stone and bone. According to traditional history, people living in this period simply did not have the social organization or technology required to build massive monuments. And yet, the Göbekli Tepe proves that they did. At the site, archaeologists have uncovered enormous T-shaped pillars carved from limestone. Some of these pillars stand more than 5 meters tall and weigh as much as 20 tons. Moving stones of that size would be a difficult challenge, even for modern construction teams equipped with advanced machinery. But the builders of Göbekli Tepe achieved this incredible feat using nothing more than primitive tools and human labor. Even more remarkable are the carvings that cover many of these pillars. The ancient builders decorated the stone surfaces with detailed images of animals, lions, snakes, vultures, wild boars, scorpions, and birds. These carvings are not rough or crude. They display a level of artistic skill and symbolic meaning that suggests the builders possessed a complex culture and belief system. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Göbekli Tepe is the way the pillars were arranged. Instead of forming houses or defensive walls, the pillars were placed in large circular formations. In the center of each circle stand 2 enormous pillars that tower above the others. Many researchers believe these circles were ceremonial spaces, temples used for rituals, gatherings, and spiritual practices. If this interpretation is correct, Göbekli Tepe may represent the earliest known example of organized religion in human history. And that realization leads to an astonishing possibility. Perhaps religion did not emerge after civilization developed. Perhaps religion helped create civilization in the first place. Some archaeologists now believe that the desire to build and maintain sacred spaces like Göbekli Tepe may have encouraged scattered groups of hunter-gatherers to cooperate with one another. Large gatherings would have required food, planning, and organization. Over time, these gatherings may have encouraged people to settle nearby and eventually experiment with farming in order to support growing populations. In other words, temples like Göbekli Tepe may have inspired the creation of agriculture and permanent settlements, not the other way around. If that idea is true, then Göbekli Tepe does more than push back the timeline of architecture. It changes the entire story of how civilization began. But the mysteries of Göbekli Tepe do not stop there, because there is another detail about the site that is even more puzzling. Thousands of years after it was built, the entire temple complex was deliberately buried. Not destroyed, not abandoned, buried. Massive amounts of soil and debris were carefully placed over the structures until the temples disappeared beneath the earth. The reasons for this decision remain unknown. Why would the builders of such an extraordinary monument choose to hide it forever? Was the burial part of a ritual? Was it done to protect the site from enemies? Or did the people who built Göbekli Tepe simply disappear, leaving behind a mystery that would remain unsolved for millennia? For thousands of years, the answers remained hidden beneath that quiet hill in southeastern Turkey, until one day, a curious archaeologist decided to take a closer look. And what he discovered would shock the world. For thousands of years, the hill of Göbekli Tepe stood quietly above the plains of southeastern Turkey. Winds swept across its surface. Seasons passed. Empires rose and fell across the Middle East. Entire civilizations were born and vanished. Yet beneath that simple mound of earth, one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in human history remained hidden. Local farmers who worked the land nearby occasionally noticed strange stones protruding from the soil. Some of these stones appeared unusually shaped, almost as if they had been carved by human hands. But no one imagined that they were fragments of an ancient monument far older than anything ever discovered before. The first scientific survey of the hill took place in the early 1960s. Archaeologists from the University of Istanbul and the University of Chicago visited the site while conducting a broader survey of prehistoric locations in the region. When they examined the stones scattered across the hill, they assumed the remains belonged to a much later period of history. At the time, researchers believed the stones were part of a medieval cemetery. Because of this assumption, the site was recorded but not considered particularly important. No large excavations were conducted, and the hill was largely forgotten. For nearly 30 years, Göbekli Tepe remained an overlooked location on archaeological maps. The stones continued to sit quietly beneath the soil, waiting for someone to recognize their true significance. That moment would finally arrive in 1994. In that year, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt traveled to southeastern Turkey as part of his research on prehistoric settlements in the region. Schmidt had spent many years studying ancient sites and was familiar with the typical characteristics of early human settlements. When he arrived at the hill known as Göbekli Tepe, he immediately noticed something unusual. Scattered across the ground were large limestone fragments, but these were not ordinary stones. Many of them had smooth, flat surfaces and sharp edges that suggested deliberate shaping. Some even showed faint carvings. To an experienced archaeologist like Schmidt, these details were impossible to ignore. Within minutes of examining the stones, Schmidt began to suspect that the hill was hiding something extraordinary. He later described the moment as a realization that came almost instantly. The stones were clearly ancient, and they had clearly been shaped by human hands. But they did not resemble the remains of a medieval cemetery. They looked far older. Schmidt contacted the German Archaeological Institute and soon organized an excavation project at the site. Work began later that year, as archaeologists and workers carefully began removing layers of soil from the hill. The true nature of the site slowly began to reveal itself. First, the tops of massive stone pillars began to appear. At first, only a few edges were visible, but as excavation continued, more and more of the pillars emerged from the earth. These were not small stones. They were enormous limestone structures rising several meters above the ground. Each pillar had been carved into a distinctive T-shape. The surfaces were smooth and carefully shaped, suggesting that the builders possessed remarkable stone-working skills. But the greatest surprise came when the team began uncovering the carvings. Animals appeared everywhere: lions, snakes, foxes, wild boars, scorpions, birds with wide wings. These images had been carved directly into the stone surfaces thousands of years ago. Despite their incredible age, many of the carvings remained remarkably well preserved. As the excavation continued, archaeologists realized that the pillars were not randomly placed. They formed large circular arrangements. Within each circle stood two massive central pillars that were even larger than the others. These central pillars towered over the surrounding stones, creating what appeared to be a sacred or ceremonial space. The discovery immediately raised new questions. These structures clearly were not houses. They were not defensive walls. They were not storage buildings. They looked like temples. And that realization created a major problem for archaeologists. According to everything historians believed at the time, temples should not exist during this period of human history. The traditional model of civilization suggested that large religious structures appeared only after complex societies developed. Cities, governments, and organized labor were thought to be necessary before monumental architecture could exist. But Göbekli Tepe did not fit that model at all. The site seemed to belong to a period thousands of years earlier than any known civilization. To determine the true age of the site, researchers began conducting scientific tests on organic materials found in the soil surrounding the pillars. The results were astonishing. Radiocarbon dating indicated that the earliest structures at Göbekli Tepe were built around 9600 BC. This meant the temples were nearly 12,000 years old. To put that in perspective, the pyramids of Egypt would not be built for another 7,000 years. The first cities of Mesopotamia would not appear for nearly 6,000 years. Even agriculture was still in its earliest stages. Yet somehow, a group of prehistoric people had gathered together and built massive stone monuments of extraordinary complexity. The discovery shocked the archaeological community. News of the site quickly spread through academic circles. Scholars from around the world began traveling to southeastern Turkey to see the ruins for themselves. Many could hardly believe what they were seeing. Massive carved pillars, complex temple layouts, sophisticated artwork, and all of it dating back to a time when humans were supposedly living as simple hunter-gatherers. The implications were enormous. If the dating was correct, Göbekli Tepe represented a level of social organization and cultural development far earlier than anyone had previously imagined. It suggested that prehistoric societies were capable of far more complex activities than historians had believed possible. But the more researchers studied the site, the more mysterious it became. Because Göbekli Tepe was not a small structure. It was enormous. And what archaeologists had uncovered was only a small portion of the entire complex. Ground-penetrating radar scans soon revealed that many more circular structures lay buried beneath the hill. Some of these structures appeared to be even larger than the ones already excavated. In fact, experts estimate that less than 10% of the site has been uncovered so far. The vast majority of Göbekli Tepe still lies hidden underground. And each new discovery continues to challenge our understanding of the ancient world. But the greatest mystery of all was still waiting to be revealed. Because the builders of Göbekli Tepe did something that archaeologists still struggle to explain. thousands of years after constructing these incredible temples. They buried them, completely, deliberately, and no one knows why. To understand why Göbekli Tepe is so extraordinary, we must first understand the timeline of human civilization as historians once believed it to be. For most of the 20th century, archaeologists followed a model often referred to as the Neolithic Revolution. According to this theory, human societies developed in a series of predictable steps. First came the discovery of agriculture. Humans learned how to cultivate plants such as wheat and barley and began domesticating animals like sheep and goats. Farming allowed people to remain in one location rather than constantly traveling in search of food. As food production became more reliable, permanent settlements appeared. Small farming villages began to grow. Over generations, these villages expanded into larger communities and eventually developed into the first cities. Only after these cities formed, historians believed, did organized religion begin to play a central role in society. Temples were constructed to honor gods. Priests emerged as religious leaders, and monumental architecture appeared as a symbol of social power and spiritual belief. This sequenced agriculture first, then villages, then cities, and finally temples became the accepted explanation for how civilization began. But Göbekli Tepe challenges this entire model. The dating of the site reveals that the temple complex was built around 9600 BC. That date places its construction at the very beginning of what archaeologists call the Neolithic period. At that time, agriculture was only just beginning to appear in parts of the Middle East. Most human groups still lived as hunter-gatherers, moving across the landscape to follow migrating animals and seasonal plants. These communities were relatively small and mobile. They typically lived in temporary camps rather than permanent settlements. Their tools were made primarily of stone, bone, and wood. According to the traditional model of human history, these early societies did not possess the social organization necessary to build massive monuments. And yet Göbekli Tepe clearly demonstrates that they did. The construction of the temples required an enormous amount of effort and coordination. The limestone pillars had to be quarried from nearby rock formations. Workers then needed to shape the stones, carve intricate images into their surfaces, and transport the finished pillars to the construction site. Some pillars weigh as much as 20 tons. Moving stones of that size without metal tools, wheels, or draft animals would have required hundreds of people working together in carefully organized teams. The builders would also have needed engineers or planners capable of designing the circular layouts of the temples and ensuring that the pillars were positioned correctly. This level of coordination suggests the existence of a complex social structure, something far more advanced than the small, loosely organized bands of hunter-gatherers traditionally associated with this period. Even more intriguing is the possibility that the temples served as gathering places for multiple groups of people. The region surrounding Göbekli Tepe could not have supported large permanent populations at that time. Instead, many archaeologists believe that different tribes may have traveled to the site at certain times of the year to participate in ceremonies or rituals. These gatherings may have involved feasting, storytelling, spiritual practices, and social exchanges between communities. Evidence supporting this idea has been found in the remains of animals discovered at the site. Archaeologists have uncovered thousands of animal bones, including those of gazelles, wild cattle, and other game animals. Many of these bones show signs of butchering and cooking, suggesting that large communal meals took place there. Some researchers believe that Göbekli Tepe may have functioned as a kind of prehistoric pilgrimage site, a sacred place where people from different regions gathered for religious ceremonies. If this interpretation is correct, it introduces a fascinating possibility. The need to support these gatherings may have encouraged people to experiment with agriculture. Imagine groups of hunter-gatherers traveling to Göbekli Tepe for seasonal ceremonies. Feeding large numbers of visitors would have required significant food resources. Over time, communities may have begun planting crops nearby to ensure that food would be available when gatherings occurred. In this way, religion and ritual may have helped inspire the development of farming rather than the other way around. This theory reverses the traditional narrative of human civilization. Instead of agriculture leading to temples, temples may have helped lead to agriculture. Instead of cities creating religion, religion may have helped create cities. While this idea remains debated among scholars, Göbekli Tepe has undeniably forced archaeologists to reconsider long-held assumptions about the origins of civilization. The site demonstrates that prehistoric societies were capable of organizing large construction projects long before the emergence of cities or complex governments. But the timeline of Göbekli Tepe raises another question that is perhaps even more intriguing. Where did the knowledge to build such structures come from? The temples at Göbekli Tepe did not appear gradually over centuries of architectural experimentation. From the earliest layers uncovered at the site, the builders were already constructing massive pillars and carefully planned circular enclosures. This suggests that the people responsible for the temples already possessed advanced knowledge of stoneworking and construction techniques. But if no earlier examples of similar structures have been found, where did that knowledge originate? Some archaeologists believe the builders simply developed these skills over time through experimentation. Others suggest that there may be older sites still waiting to be discovered places, where early humans first learned the techniques later used at Göbekli Tepe. It is also possible that much of humanity's earliest architectural history has simply been lost. Over thousands of years, ancient structures made of wood, clay, and other perishable materials would have disappeared completely. Only stone monuments like Göbekli Tepe have survived long enough to reach the present day. Whatever the explanation may be, one thing is certain. Göbekli Tepe forces us to rethink our assumptions about prehistoric people. Far from being simple nomads struggling to survive, the builders of Göbekli Tepe appear to have possessed a rich cultural life, complex spiritual beliefs, and the ability to cooperate on an extraordinary scale. They created something that had never been seen before in human history. A monumental sacred complex built at the very dawn of civilization. But the mysteries of Göbekli Tepe do not end with its astonishing age or its revolutionary implications for human history. Because when archaeologists continued excavating the site, they began to notice something equally remarkable. The temples themselves were unlike anything ever discovered before. Their architecture was strange, symbolic, and deeply mysterious. And hidden within the stone pillars were clues that may reveal the beliefs and worldview of the people who built them. Those clues would lead researchers into one of the most fascinating chapters of the Göbekli Tepe story. A chapter that reveals the incredible artistry and symbolism carved into the ancient stones. As archaeologists continued excavating Göbekli Tepe, it quickly became clear that the site was unlike any other ancient structure ever discovered. The layout, the shapes of the pillars, and the symbolism carved into the stone all suggested that the builders were creating something deeply meaningful, something far more complex than a simple gathering place. The most striking feature of the site is the massive stone pillars that dominate each structure. These pillars are carved into a distinctive T shape, with a wide horizontal top resting on a tall vertical shaft. At first glance they appear simple, but a closer look reveals that they are carefully crafted and highly symbolic. Many of the pillars rise more than 5 meters into the air, towering above the surrounding ground. Some weigh as much as 20 tons. Each one was carved from limestone taken from nearby quarries, shaped with stone tools, and then transported to the construction site. The effort required to move and position these pillars would have been enormous. Yet the most fascinating detail is what the pillars seem to represent. On several of the central pillars, archaeologists discovered carvings that resemble human arms. These arms run down the sides of the pillars and end with hands resting across the front of the stone. Below the hands, belts and loincloths are carved into the rock. These details suggest that the pillars themselves may represent stylized human figures. If this interpretation is correct, The towering stones at the center of each enclosure could symbolize giant beings standing within the temple space. The builders may have imagined these pillars as representations of powerful ancestral spirits, deities, or mythological figures watching over the ceremonies performed at the site. This idea becomes even more intriguing when we consider how the temples are arranged. The structures at Göbekli Tepe are not random clusters of stones. Instead, they form carefully planned circular enclosures. Within each enclosure, the outer ring of pillars surrounds two larger central pillars positioned at the heart of the structure. The layout almost resembles a gathering of figures standing in a circle, with two dominant figures at the center. Some researchers believe this arrangement represents a symbolic meeting between humans and supernatural beings. Others suggest that the pillars represent members of a spiritual world assembled together in a sacred space. Whatever their exact meaning, the architectural design clearly reflects a deep symbolic vision. The builders of Göbekli Tepe were not simply stacking stones to create shelters. They were constructing spaces designed to convey powerful spiritual ideas. Another remarkable aspect of the architecture is the precision with which the structures were built. The circular enclosures are carefully shaped, with pillars positioned at regular intervals. The stone floors appear to have been deliberately leveled, and the pillars themselves were placed into carved sockets that helped secure them upright. This level of planning suggests that the builders had a clear architectural blueprint in mind before construction began. They were not improvising. They were following a deliberate design. One of the most impressive examples of this design is known as Enclosure D, one of the largest and best preserved structures discovered at the site. In this enclosure, two enormous central pillars stand facing one another, surrounded by a ring of smaller pillars embedded in the walls of the circular structure. The central pillars are decorated with detailed carvings and symbolic imagery, making them the focal point of the entire space. Standing inside this enclosure today, visitors often describe the experience as deeply mysterious. The towering stones create an atmosphere that feels almost otherworldly, as if the builders intended the space to inspire awe and reverence. It is easy to imagine ancient gatherings taking place here thousands of years ago, with people assembled around the pillars as rituals were performed. But the architectural mysteries of Göbekli Tepe extend beyond the pillars themselves. Archaeologists have also discovered that many of the stone surfaces were intentionally smoothed and shaped with great care. The builders invested significant effort into the appearance of the structures, suggesting that visual impact was an important part of the design. Even the arrangement of the pillars may have had symbolic meaning. Some researchers have suggested that the circular layouts reflect early cosmological ideas about the universe. The central pillars might represent powerful spiritual beings or celestial forces, while the surrounding pillars represent the natural world or the community gathered around them. While these interpretations remain speculative, they highlight the depth of symbolism embedded in the architecture of the site. And then there are the carvings. Nearly every pillar uncovered at Göbekli Tepe displays images of animals and abstract symbols. These carvings are among the most intriguing features of the entire complex. Unlike the architecture, which suggests order and structure, the carvings seem to depict a chaotic and powerful world filled with wild creatures. Foxes leap across the surfaces of the stone. Snakes twist and coil in long, winding shapes. Vultures spread their wings in dramatic poses. Scorpions appear with their stingers raised. These animals were not random decorations. They likely carried deep symbolic meanings for the people who carved them. Many of the animals depicted at Göbekli Tepe were powerful predators or dangerous creatures. Their presence may reflect ancient beliefs about the forces of nature and the spiritual significance of the animal world. Some researchers have even suggested that the carvings could represent mythological stories or symbolic maps of the natural environments surrounding the site. The variety and complexity of the carvings reveal a level of artistic skill that challenges the idea that early humans were culturally primitive. Whoever built Göbekli Tepe possessed a sophisticated understanding of symbolism storytelling, and artistic expression. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the architecture is what it tells us about cooperation. Constructing these temples would have required large groups of people working together over extended periods of time. Quarrying the stone, carving the pillars, transporting them across the landscape, and assembling the structures all demanded careful coordination and shared effort. This suggests that the builders were not isolated individuals, but members of a community capable of organizing large projects. It also implies that the temples held great importance for the people who built them. Communities do not invest such enormous effort into structures that hold little meaning. Göbekli Tepe must have been a place of tremendous spiritual or cultural significance, a place where beliefs, traditions, and rituals were powerful enough to bring people together and inspire them to create something monumental. Yet even as archaeologists uncovered more of the site, one question continued to grow more puzzling. If Göbekli Tepe was so important to the people who built it, why did they eventually abandon it? And why did they go to such great lengths to bury the temples beneath tons of earth and stone? The answers to those questions remain one of the greatest mysteries of the ancient world. And the story becomes even more fascinating when we look more closely at the animal carvings themselves. Because hidden within those carvings may be clues about the beliefs, fears, and mythology of the people who built Göbekli Tepe, clues that could help us understand how the earliest religious ideas in human history began. As archaeologists studied the stone pillars of Göbekli Tepe more closely, they began to notice something remarkable. Nearly every pillar was covered with carefully carved images of animals. These carvings were not random decorations. They were detailed, deliberate, and repeated throughout the entire complex. Lions, snakes, vultures, foxes, scorpions, wild boars, cranes, and other creatures appear again and again across the surfaces of the stone. Some animals are shown standing alone, while others appear to move across the stone as if part of a larger scene. Their bodies twist, leap, or spread their wings in dramatic positions. What makes these carvings so fascinating is not just their artistic quality, but the choice of animals themselves. Many of the creatures depicted at Göbekli Tepe were among the most dangerous animals in the prehistoric landscape. Scorpions with raised stingers, snakes coiled and ready to strike, and powerful predators such as lions and wild boars dominate the imagery. This suggests that the carvings may reflect the fears, challenges, and spiritual beliefs of the people who lived in this environment. For early hunter-gatherers, survival depended on understanding and respecting the forces of nature. The animals around them were not just food sources. They were powerful symbols of life, death, danger, and transformation. Some archaeologists believe that these carvings may represent mythological creatures or spirit animals connected to ancient belief systems. In many early cultures, animals were believed to possess spiritual power or to act as messengers between the human world and the spirit world. It is possible that the builders of Göbekli Tepe believed certain animals were sacred or connected to supernatural forces. The carvings may have been intended to honor these creatures or to invoke their power during rituals performed at the site. One of the most striking carvings discovered at Göbekli Tepe shows a large bird, often interpreted as a vulture, standing beside a headless human figure. This image has captured the attention of researchers because it may reveal something about ancient burial practices. Some scholars believe the carving may represent a ritual known as sky burial. In this practice, the bodies of the dead were left exposed so that birds could consume the flesh. The bones would later be collected and buried. Variations of this ritual have been observed in several ancient cultures across the world. If this interpretation is correct, the image could represent a belief that birds carried the souls of the dead into the sky or the afterlife. Other carvings appear to show animals interacting in ways that suggest stories or symbolic meanings that are no longer fully understood. Some scenes seem almost narrative in nature, as if they were illustrating myths or spiritual teachings known to the people who built the temple. But the carvings may also hold another layer of meaning. In recent years, some researchers have proposed that the animal symbols could represent constellations in the night sky. According to this theory, the pillars of Göbekli Tepe may contain some of the earliest attempts by humans to record astronomical knowledge. One particular pillar, often referred to as the vulture stone, has attracted significant attention from scholars studying ancient astronomy. The arrangement of animals carved into this stone has been interpreted by some researchers as a symbolic representation of constellations, visible in the sky thousands of years ago. While this theory remains controversial, it raises an intriguing possibility. If the carvings do represent celestial patterns, the builders of Göbekli Tepe may have been carefully observing the movements of stars and planets long before the development of written astronomy. Early humans were deeply connected to the rhythms of the natural world. The rising and setting of stars could signal seasonal changes, migrations of animals, or the best times to gather food. Observing the sky would have been an important survival skill, as well as a source of wonder and spiritual inspiration. If Göbekli Tepe served as a place where people gathered to observe the sky, perform rituals, and share stories about the cosmos, the temple may represent one of the earliest examples of humanity trying to understand its place in the universe. Another possibility is that the carvings served as a symbolic map of the environment surrounding the temple. Each animal could represent a particular region, clan, or hunting territory associated with the communities who gathered there. The pillars might have acted as markers that helped tell the story of the people who built them, the animals they hunted, the dangers they faced, and the spiritual beliefs that guided their lives. Whatever their exact meaning may be, the carvings demonstrate that the builders of Göbekli Tepe possessed a sophisticated symbolic language. They were capable of expressing complex ideas through art and architecture, leaving behind messages carved into stone that still captivate researchers thousands of years later. And yet, despite decades of study, many of these symbols remain mysterious. We do not know the language spoken by the people who built Göbekli Tepe. We do not know the myths they told, the rituals they performed, or the names of the spirits or gods they may have worshipped. All that remains are the stones themselves, silent witnesses to a world that existed long before recorded history. But the mystery of Göbekli Tepe becomes even deeper when we consider something truly extraordinary. After building these magnificent temples and carving their powerful symbols into the pillars, the people who created this place did something that archaeologists still struggle to explain. They buried it, not by accident, not through natural disaster, but deliberately. Layer by layer, soil and debris were poured into the enclosures until the towering pillars disappeared beneath the earth. Why would a society invest so much effort in building such an incredible monument, only to hide it forever? The answer to that question may hold the key to one of the greatest mysteries of ancient history, and it is a mystery that still puzzles archaeologists today. Among all the mysteries surrounding Göbekli Tepe, perhaps the most puzzling question is not how it was built, but why it disappeared. After constructing these enormous temples and carving intricate symbols into the towering pillars, the people who built Göbekli Tepe made a decision that still confounds archaeologists today. They buried it, not slowly through neglect, not through the collapse of buildings over time, but intentionally. Layer by layer, the builders filled the temple enclosures with soil, rubble, broken tools, and animal bones until the great stone pillars were completely hidden beneath the earth. This was not the work of nature. It was deliberate. Archaeologists studying the site quickly realized that the filling of the enclosures had been done with great care. The soil and debris inside the structures were not simply random dirt from the surrounding hillside. Instead, the fill contained a mixture of stones, fragments of tools, animal remains, and other materials that appear to have been deliberately collected and placed into the temples. In some places, the fill reached several meters deep. Over time, the once towering pillars vanished beneath the surface, until only a mound of earth remained. To anyone passing by, the site would have looked like a simple hill, hiding the temples that once stood proudly above the landscape. This raises an extraordinary question. Why would the builders of such an incredible monument choose to bury it? One possibility is that the burial was part of a ritual. Some archaeologists believe the temples may have been intentionally sealed as part of a ceremonial practice. In many ancient cultures, sacred spaces were periodically renewed, abandoned, or symbolically closed after a certain period of use. By burying the structures, the builders may have been marking the end of an important spiritual era. In this interpretation, the burial of Göbekli Tepe was not an act of destruction, but an act of respect. The temples had served their purpose, and the people who built them chose to return them to the earth. Another theory suggests that environmental changes may have played a role. Around the time Göbekli Tepe was abandoned, the climate of the region was gradually shifting. The end of the last ice age brought changes to rainfall patterns, vegetation, and animal populations. These changes may have affected the ability of hunter-gatherer communities to gather food in the region. If the people who used the temple complex were forced to move elsewhere in search of better resources, they may have decided to bury the site before leaving. But this explanation still leaves an important question unanswered. Why bury it at all? If the community had simply moved away, the structures could have been left standing. Yet the evidence clearly shows that someone went to great effort to cover the temples completely. Another possibility is that the burial was meant to protect the site. Perhaps the builders feared that enemies or rival groups might damage the sacred structures. By burying the temples, they may have hoped to preserve them for the future. But this idea also raises new questions. Who were these enemies? And why would the builders believe that the temples needed protection? Some researchers have suggested that the burial may have been connected to social changes occurring within early human societies. As agriculture began to spread throughout the region, people gradually shifted from a nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyle to more permanent farming communities. This transformation changed the way humans lived, worked, and organized their societies. New settlements appeared, fields were planted, villages began to form. It is possible that the religious traditions associated with Göbekli Tepe belonged to an earlier way of life, one connected to hunting, gathering, and seasonal gatherings of scattered tribes. As farming communities became more permanent and organized, the old spiritual traditions may have lost their importance. The temples of Göbekli Tepe may have been seen as relics of an earlier age. If this is true, the burial of the temples may represent the symbolic end of that ancient belief system. The old sacred place was closed, buried beneath the earth as a new chapter of human civilization began. But there is another possibility, one that has fascinated many researchers and historians. What if the burial was meant to preserve knowledge? The careful way in which the structures were filled suggests that the builders were not simply trying to destroy the temples. Instead, they may have been deliberately protecting them. By covering the pillars with soil and debris, the builders unintentionally created a perfect environment for preservation. The carvings on the stones remained shielded from wind, rain, and erosion for thousands of years. Without that protective layer of soil, the temples might have gradually crumbled away and disappeared long ago. In a strange twist of fate, the act of burying Göbekli Tepe may be the very reason it survived. But even after decades of excavation, archaeologists still cannot say with certainty why the site was sealed. And the mystery grows even deeper when we consider how much of Göbekli Tepe remains unexplored. Despite years of research and excavation, only a small portion of the site has been uncovered. Ground-penetrating radar and other surveying technologies reveal that many more circular structures remain buried beneath the hill. Some experts estimate that as much as 90% of the site is still hidden underground. That means the temples we see today may represent only a small part of a much larger complex. What other carvings, structures, or clues might still lie beneath the soil? Could future discoveries reveal new information about the people who built the temples, their beliefs, and the reasons they chose to bury them? Every new excavation season brings fresh discoveries, but it also brings new questions. Göbekli Tepe continues to challenge archaeologists, historians, and researchers who attempt to understand its purpose. Because even after thousands of years, the stones still keep their secrets. But as scientists continue studying the site, new theories have begun to emerge. Some of these ideas attempt to explain the deeper meaning behind the temples and the culture that created them. Others suggest that Göbekli Tepe may represent something even more extraordinary, something that could reshape our understanding of the earliest chapters of human history. And those theories take us into one of the most fascinating debates in modern archaeology. A debate about lost knowledge, forgotten civilizations, and the possibility that our understanding of the ancient world is still incomplete. As the discoveries at Göbekli Tepe began to spread through the scientific world, archaeologists were faced with a profound challenge. The site did not fit comfortably within the traditional narrative of human history. For decades, the story of civilization had followed a familiar pattern. Early humans were believed to have lived simple lives as nomadic hunter-gatherers. Only after the development of agriculture, permanent settlements, and organized societies did humans begin constructing monumental architecture and complex religious structures. Göbekli Tepe appeared to break that pattern entirely. Here was a massive temple complex built thousands of years before cities existed. Its enormous pillars required planning, cooperation, and specialized craftsmanship. Its carvings suggested a rich symbolic culture. Its architecture revealed an understanding of design and organization that seemed far beyond what archaeologists expected from early hunter-gatherer societies. For many researchers, the site forced a difficult but exciting realization. Perhaps our understanding of prehistoric humanity had been too simplistic. Early humans may have been far more intelligent, organized, and culturally sophisticated than previously imagined. Some scholars argue that Göbekli Tepe represents the beginning of monumental architecture, turning point in human development when communities first began gathering in large numbers to build shared sacred spaces. In this view, the site marks the birth of organized religion and communal cooperation. But other researchers have asked the different question. What if Göbekli Tepe was not the beginning of something new, but the final echo of something much older? This idea has sparked one of the most intriguing debates in modern archaeology. Some historians believe that the knowledge required to build Göbekli Tepe may have originated from an earlier cultural tradition, one that has not yet been discovered or has long since vanished from the archaeological record. Human history stretches back tens of thousands of years before the construction of Göbekli Tepe. During that vast period of time, countless communities lived, migrated, and adapted to changing climates and landscapes. Most of their structures were likely made from wood, mud, or other materials that do not survive for thousands of years. If earlier societies experimented with architecture, spiritual traditions, or symbolic systems, much of that evidence may have disappeared completely. Göbekli Tepe could therefore represent the earliest surviving example of a much older tradition. Another factor that may have shaped human societies during this period was the dramatic environmental change occurring at the end of the last ice age. Around 12,000 years ago, the world was undergoing a major climatic transformation. Glaciers that had covered large parts of the northern hemisphere were melting. Sea levels were rising. Entire ecosystems were shifting. For communities living during this time, the world around them was changing rapidly. Some researchers believe that these environmental shifts may have inspired new spiritual ideas and rituals. As people struggled to understand the powerful forces shaping their environment, they may have created sacred places like Göbekli Tepe to connect with the natural world and seek guidance from supernatural powers. The temple complex may have served as a place where communities gathered to perform ceremonies related to survival, fertility, and the changing seasons. But there are also more controversial theories. A small number of researchers and writers had proposed that Göbekli Tepe could be evidence of a lost civilization that existed before the end of the Ice Age. According to these ideas, an advanced culture may have flourished during a time when much of the world's coastline was exposed due to lower sea levels. When the Ice Age ended and sea levels rose, many of these early settlements could have been flooded and lost beneath the oceans. While this theory remains highly speculative and is not widely accepted among mainstream archaeologists, it reflects the profound sense of mystery that surrounds Göbekli Tepe. The site reminds us that large portions of human history remain unknown. Every year, archaeologists discover new sites that push back the timeline of human innovation and cultural complexity. What once seemed impossible, such as monumental architecture built by hunter-gatherers, has now become an accepted part of the historical record. Göbekli Tepe may therefore represent just one chapter in a much longer story, a story that humanity is only beginning to rediscover. What makes this possibility so fascinating is the sheer scale of the site itself. As excavations continue, archaeologists are uncovering new enclosures, additional pillars, and more carvings. Each discovery reveals new details about the people who built the complex and the society that organized its construction. But perhaps the most remarkable fact is how little of the site has actually been excavated. Scientists estimate that only a small fraction of Göbekli Tepe has been uncovered so far. The vast majority of the hill still conceals structures buried beneath thousands of years of soil. Those hidden structures may hold answers to questions that researchers have been asking for decades. Who were the builders of Göbekli Tepe? What stories did they tell about the world around them? What beliefs inspired them to gather together and create one of the earliest monumental structures in human history? And why did they ultimately choose to bury it? Each new discovery adds another piece to the puzzle, but the full picture remains incomplete. In many ways, Göbekli Tepe represents the frontier of archaeological exploration. It stands as a reminder that the past is not a fixed story carved in stone. It is an evolving mystery that continues to change as new evidence comes to light. The stones of Göbekli Tepe have already forced historians to reconsider the origins of religion, the development of agriculture, and the capabilities of prehistoric societies. But the most extraordinary discoveries may still lie hidden beneath the surface of the hill, waiting, silent, untouched for thousands of years. And as archaeologists continue their work, one thing becomes increasingly clear. Göbekli Tepe is not simply an ancient ruin. It is a doorway into humanity's forgotten past. Despite decades of excavation and research, one of the most astonishing facts about Göbekli Tepe is how little of the site has actually been uncovered. When people first hear about this ancient temple complex, they often imagine that archaeologists have already revealed most of its secrets. After all, the towering pillars and circular enclosures have been photographed, studied, and discussed in documentaries and scientific publications around the world. But the reality is far more mysterious. Experts estimate that only a small portion of Göbekli Tepe has been excavated so far. In fact, many researchers believe that as much as 90% of the site still lies hidden beneath the soil. The visible structures that visitors see today represent only a fraction of what may be buried under the hill. Using technologies such as ground-penetrating radar and magnetic surveys, archaeologists have been able to detect additional structures below the surface without disturbing the ground. These scans reveal circular patterns that strongly resemble the temple enclosures that have already been excavated. In other words, the structures we know about may be only the beginning. Dozens of additional enclosures may still be waiting beneath the soil, preserved exactly as they were thousands of years ago. Each of these buried structures could contain new carvings, new architectural designs, and new clues about the culture that built the site. And with each new excavation, archaeologists face an important decision. How much should they uncover? Excavation is a slow and delicate process. Once a structure is uncovered, it is exposed to the natural forces of weather and erosion. For thousands of years, the temples of Göbekli Tepe were protected by the very soil that buried them. Now that they have been revealed, archaeologists must carefully balance the desire to explore with the responsibility to preserve. Because of this, excavations at the site proceed slowly and carefully. Each layer of soil removed from the site reveals more than just stone pillars. Archaeologists also discover fragments of tools, animal bones, stone carvings, and other materials that provide insight into the daily lives of the people who once gathered there. These discoveries allow researchers to reconstruct aspects of the ancient world that existed around Göbekli Tepe. They reveal what animals people hunted, what tools they used, and even hints about the ceremonies that may have taken place inside the temple enclosures. But as each new discovery answers one question, it often raises several more. For example, archaeologists have discovered that the temple complex was built and rebuilt over long periods of time. Some enclosures appear to have been constructed, used for a number of years, and then intentionally filled with soil before new structures were built nearby. This pattern suggests that Göbekli Tepe was not a single construction project, but an evolving sacred landscape that changed over generations. Different groups of people may have returned to the site again and again, each adding their own contributions to the complex. The site therefore represents not just a single moment in history, but a long tradition of ritual and cultural activity. Another mystery concerns the people themselves. Although archaeologists have uncovered countless tools, carvings, and animal bones at Göbekli Tepe, they have found very few human remains. This absence raises intriguing questions. Where did the people who built and used the temple live? Did they have nearby settlements that have not yet been discovered? Or was Göbekli Tepe a special gathering place visited only during certain times of the year? Some researchers believe that the builders of the temples may have lived in temporary camps scattered across the surrounding landscape. At specific moments during the year, perhaps during seasonal migrations or ceremonial festivals, different groups may have traveled to the temple, complex to participate in rituals and communal gatherings. These gatherings may have lasted for days or even weeks. Large feasts may have taken place, with hunters bringing animals to share with the community. Storytelling, music, and spiritual ceremonies may have filled the spaces between the towering pillars. For people living 12,000 years ago, such gatherings would have been powerful moments of social connection. In a world where communities were often scattered and isolated, a sacred place like Göbekli Tepe may have served as a center for cultural exchange and spiritual unity. But there may still be far more to discover beneath the ground. Some researchers believe that deeper layers beneath the currently excavated structures could reveal even older phases of construction. If that were true, it would push the origins of the site even further back in time. Such discoveries could fundamentally change our understanding of when and how monumental architecture first appeared in human history. For now, those answers remain hidden beneath the earth. The hill of Göbekli Tepe still guards most of its secrets, and that sense of mystery is part of what makes the site so fascinating. Every year, new research and new excavations bring us a little closer to understanding the people who built this incredible place. But the story is far from complete. In fact, it may take generations of archaeologists to fully uncover the history buried beneath that quiet hill in southeastern Turkey. Yet even with everything we have learned so far, Göbekli Tepe has already changed the way we think about our past. It has revealed that prehistoric people were capable of achievements once thought impossible. It has shown that the origins of religion, art, and communal cooperation may stretch far deeper into the past than we once imagined. And perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that the story of humanity is still being written. Beneath the soil of Göbekli Tepe, countless stones remain silent. But someday they may speak. And when they do, they may reveal chapters of human history that we have not yet even begun to imagine. When the discoveries at Göbekli Tepe first began to reach the global scientific community, many archaeologists realized that they were looking at something truly extraordinary. The site was not simply another ancient ruin. It was evidence that our understanding of early human history might be incomplete. For generations, historians had believed that the rise of civilization followed a predictable path. Humans first developed agriculture. Farming allowed them to settle in one place. Villages formed. Those villages grew into cities. Governments emerged, social hierarchies developed, and only then did monumental architecture and organized religion appear. This narrative had shaped the way scholars thought about human progress for more than a century. But Göbekli Tepe did not fit that narrative. Here was a monumental temple complex built thousands of years before cities existed. Its construction required careful planning, skilled craftsmanship, and the cooperation of large groups of people. Its symbolism suggested an organized spiritual culture. And yet it appeared in a time when humans were believed to live only as scattered bands of hunter-gatherers. The site forced archaeologists to ask a radical question. What if the origins of civilization did not begin with agriculture or cities at all? What if the desire to gather in sacred places, places of ritual, belief, and shared identity, was the force that brought early communities together? In other words, what if religion helped create civilization? Some researchers now believe that sites like Göbekli Tepe may have served as catalysts for social transformation. By bringing scattered groups of people together for ceremonies and rituals, these sacred spaces may have encouraged cooperation on a scale never seen before. Large gatherings would have required planning and coordination. Food would need to be prepared for large numbers of visitors. Hunters would have to supply animals for feasts. Workers would need to quarry stone, transport materials, and construct new structures. Over time, these gatherings could have created new social relationships between communities that had previously lived separate lives. And once people began cooperating on large projects, new possibilities opened. Perhaps it was in places like Göbekli Tepe that humans first began to imagine permanent settlements. Perhaps the need to feed large gatherings of people encouraged early experimentation with agriculture. Instead of agriculture leading to civilization, the process may have worked in reverse. Sacred gathering places may have inspired the development of farming, which in turn allowed communities to grow and eventually form the first cities. If this theory is correct, it means that religion may have played a far more central role in the birth of civilization than historians once believed. Göbekli Tepe may represent the moment when human communities first began organizing themselves around shared beliefs and collective projects. Another fascinating possibility is that the site reveals the beginnings of social specialization. Building the temples required skilled individuals who could carve stone, plan architectural layouts, and organize labor. These activities suggest that some members of the community may have begun focusing on specific tasks rather than participating equally in all aspects of survival. Over time, this kind of specialization would become a defining feature of complex societies. Farmers would grow crops. Builders would construct structures. Religious leaders would guide rituals. Craftspeople would create tools and artwork. In other words, the seeds of civilization may have begun with shared cultural and spiritual experiences. Göbekli Tepe may represent one of the earliest examples of humanity discovering the power of collective identity. But perhaps the most profound lesson of Göbekli Tepe is the reminder that human history is far more complex than we once imagined. For centuries, the ancient world was interpreted through the lens of written records from civilizations such as Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Greece. These records shaped our understanding of the past. Yet the builders of Göbekli Tepe lived thousands of years before writing was invented. Their story was never written down. It survived only in stone, and because of that, it remained hidden for thousands of years beneath a quiet hill in southeastern Turkey. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe reminds us that vast chapters of human history remain unknown. Entire cultures may have flourished long before the earliest written records, leaving behind only fragments of evidence waiting to be discovered. Each new archaeological discovery has the potential to reshape the timeline of our past. Just a few decades ago, the idea that hunter-gatherers could build massive stone temples would have seemed impossible. Today, Göbekli Tepe stands as undeniable proof that they did, and it reminds us that the story of civilization is not fixed or complete. It is an evolving puzzle. With every excavation, every artifact, and every new discovery, the pieces of that puzzle slowly come together. But many pieces are still missing, and some of them may still lie hidden beneath the soil of Göbekli Tepe, because even after years of excavation, the site continues to surprise archaeologists. New carvings are discovered, new structures are revealed, new interpretations emerge. Each discovery brings us closer to understanding the people who built this remarkable place. But at the same time, each discovery reminds us how much we still do not know. Göbekli Tepe challenges us to reconsider the origins of religion, the development of social cooperation, and the capabilities of prehistoric societies. It tells us that human beings have always been capable of extraordinary achievements, even long before the rise of cities and empires. And perhaps the most powerful message of all is this: the past is not as distant from us as we sometimes believe. The same curiosity, creativity, and desire to understand the world that drove the builders of Göbekli Tepe still exists within us today. And as long as we continue exploring the mysteries of our past, new discoveries will continue to reshape our understanding of where we came from. High above the plains of southeastern Turkey, the quiet hill of Göbekli Tepe continues to stand as it has for thousands of years. At first glance, it appears unremarkable, just another rise in the landscape, shaped by wind, time, and the slow passage of centuries. But beneath that hill lies one of the most extraordinary places ever discovered by archaeologists. Göbekli Tepe is more than an ancient ruin. It is a message from the distant past, carved in stone by people who lived at the very dawn of human civilization. For thousands of years, the story of those people remained hidden beneath the earth. Their temples were buried, their culture vanished, their voices were lost to time, and yet, somehow, their work survived. Today, when we look at the towering pillars of Göbekli Tepe, we are looking directly into a world that existed nearly 12,000 years ago. A world long before the pyramids of Egypt, long before the cities of Mesopotamia, long before writing, metal tools, or recorded history. The builders of Göbekli Tepe left behind no written language to explain their beliefs. They did not record their myths, their rituals, or the meaning of the symbols they carved into the stone. But even without written words, their message still reaches us. Through the massive pillars they raised, through the animals they carved into the rock, through the sacred spaces they created for their gatherings and ceremonies. These ancient builders were not primitive people struggling to survive in a harsh landscape. They were thinkers, artists, planners, and storytellers. They were human beings who looked at the world around them and tried to understand their place within it. Just like we do today. Göbekli Tepe reminds us that the roots of human curiosity stretch far deeper into the past than we once believed. The desire to gather together, to share beliefs, to create meaning, and to build something greater than ourselves may be among the oldest instincts of our species. Long before cities, long before empires, long before written history, human beings were already searching for answers to the biggest questions of existence. Who are we? Where did we come from? What powers shaped the world around us? The temples of Göbekli Tepe may have been places where those questions were explored through rituals, stories, and shared experiences. They may have been places where early communities discovered the strength that comes from cooperation and shared belief. And in doing so, they may have taken the first steps toward creating the civilizations that would one day rise across the world. But even after decades of study, Göbekli Tepe continues to challenge us. So many questions remain unanswered. Who were the people who built these temples? What stories did they tell as they gathered around the towering pillars? What meaning did the animals carved into the stones hold for them? And why did they ultimately choose to bury the temples they had worked so hard to create? Perhaps those answers still lie hidden beneath the soil of the hill. Perhaps future generations of archaeologists will uncover new structures, new carvings, and new clues that reveal more about the mysterious culture that once flourished there. Or perhaps some of the secrets of Göbekli Tepe will remain forever beyond our reach. But even if we never uncover every detail, the site has already changed the way we understand the ancient world. Göbekli Tepe has shown us that the story of human civilization is far older and far more complex than we once imagined. It reminds us that the past is not a simple timeline moving neatly from primitive beginnings to modern achievements. Instead, it is a vast and intricate tapestry filled with forgotten cultures, hidden discoveries, and mysteries waiting to be revealed. The stones of Göbekli Tepe have survived nearly 12,000 years, through storms and shifting climates, through the rise and fall of empires, through countless generations who walked the land without realizing what lay beneath their feet. And now those stones stand once again beneath the open sky, inviting us to ask new questions about our past. Because somewhere within those ancient pillars lies a story that connects us directly to the earliest chapters of human history. A story of creativity, belief, cooperation, and curiosity. A story that reminds us that even in the distant past, humanity was capable of extraordinary things. Göbekli Tepe is not just the oldest temple ever discovered. It is a reminder that the search for meaning, the desire to build, and the spirit of discovery have always been part of what it means to be human. And perhaps, as archaeologists continue to uncover the secrets hidden beneath that quiet hill, we will learn even more about the people who stood there 12,000 years ago, looking at the same sky we see today, wondering about the mysteries of the universe. Because in the end, Göbekli Tepe does not just tell us about the past. It reminds us that the story of humanity is still unfolding, and the next discovery may change everything we thought we knew.